So, this week in the Sacred Gathering, we are going to look at Psalm 63. So, let me start out by just reading that. I'm going to read two different versions, one from the English Standard Version and then another from Eugene Peterson's Message, just to give us some kind of contrast. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you, my flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and your glory. Because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich foods, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips. When I remember you upon my bed, and I meditate on you in the watches of the night, for you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you, your right hand upholds me. But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, for the mouths of liars will be stopped. And then the other version. God, you're my God. I can't get enough of you. I've worked up such hunger and thirst for God, traveling across dry and weary deserts. So here I am in the place of worship, eyes open, drinking in your strength and glory. In your generous love, I really am living at last. My lips brim praises like fountains. I bless you every time I take a breath. My arms wave like banners of praise to you. I eat my fill of prime rib and gravy. I smack my lips. It's time to shout praises. If I am sleepless at midnight, I spend the hours in grateful reflection because you've always stood up for me. I'm free to run and play. I hold on to you for dear life, and you hold me steady as a post. Those who are out to get me are marked for doom, marked for death, bound for death. They'll die violent deaths. Jackals will tear them limb from limb. But the king is glad in God. His true friends spread the joy, while small-minded gossips are gagged for good. So kind of an interesting thing about just the Psalms overall. So this psalm has the subscription that says a Psalm of David, or most generally just of David, when he was in the wilderness of Judah. So the subscriptions themselves of David and their association with David, as we know, was a songwriter, are a little more vague than we sometimes make out in English. We like to think of authorship, in terms of this person wrote this and we have copyright laws so other people can't claim this. But back in the day, these were considered kind of community resources. They're more like, telling a joke in which people can make their own variations, make it more appropriate. Or traditional stories in which we have multiple versions of different ways of telling a fairy tale, that sort of thing. So it's a little unclear if David was the original author of something like this, or if people continued to edit it, or if it was done in kind of the spirit of David. We also know that he commissioned a lot of works, so those would maybe be dedicated to David. But for whatever the reason is, it's important for us to recognize that these are not all simply products that came directly out of King David's experience, and they're not included in the Bible just simply as expressions of thanks or whatever. The Psalms are meant to be kind of community treasures in which people find themselves in these Psalms, in which the Psalms themselves teach us to pray and think in a certain way. And so, whether this came out of David's own experience or it came out of other people kind of reflecting on his experiences and writing their own is kind of important because I think the goal again is that these are ours and we can connect to these. And so if David is kind of our archetype for this, it's interesting. It says, when he was in the wilderness of Judah, he had kind of two distinct periods in his life when he spent a lot of time out in the wilderness and in exile and outside of society. And they're very different points in his life. And we're not sure which one it's supposed to be associated with, if either, or maybe potentially both, right? When Saul was kind of when David was kind of a rising star, when he is, he's gotten famous killing Goliath. He's at the court of the king playing music for him. He's best friends with the crown prince. He's a very effective warrior, those sorts of things. And King Saul, who is kind of slowly descending into madness as God has abandoned him because he just won't trust him, is jealous. And David has to go on the run for his life, even though he's not done anything wrong, but be really good at what he's supposed to be doing. And as this young man, he finds himself in the wilderness, being hunted as a traitor, even though he isn't one. And God shows up and provides for him again and again and again. And so maybe this time of exile in the wilderness, when he thinks, things are on the rise, when he thinks everything's going well, and yet he's being unjustly pursued and accused and hunted, maybe this is the time that kind of inspired this psalm, whether it was his or somebody else's. But David spends another portion of his life out in the wilderness, and the circumstances could not be more different. After Saul is gone and dead, after King David has arrived, when he is at the height of his power, he starts to make mistakes, right? The most famous of which is this horrible story about Bathsheba, when he, has probably raping her and then having her husband be murdered or whatever. And then there's all these just really nasty stories about kind of his family falling apart until the point that one of the princes, who is a murderer, who David is tried to kind of exile and not be part of the court anymore, but not very successfully, he turns on his father, and David finds himself at the height of his power, kind of betrayed by his own people. They don't want him anymore. They'd rather have the young man Absalom. And so, whereas the first time it was injustice that brought him there, he just became saying, this isn't fair. David, at this kind of late stage in his kingship, is looking at himself as a failure morally, a failure as a father, and yet he is going to that same place. And so again, we're not really sure which of these times this psalm is supposed to be associated with. He finds himself in the desert, in the dryness in these places, and I think it's a beautiful psalm because whenever things in our life feel like they are lacking, we can maybe find ourselves in the psalm. We can maybe find something, whether it's because the world is being unfair to us, or if it's maybe because our own mistakes, and this is exactly where we probably should be based on the things we have done and the choices we have made. In any of those cases, this psalm might have something to say to us. And so what I think I really like about this setting is it's really easy for us most of the time to focus on kind of the circumstances, right? Whether it's David on the run from Saul, whether it's David on the run from Absalom, whether he has deep guilt about what's happening or just a deep sense of unfairness of what's happening, this psalm doesn't really talk that much about circumstances. Most of my prayer life, most of the time when I'm angry and I'm frustrated, I find myself in desolate places, in the wilderness, whether that's literal places like this where we're in danger, or it's places where just our souls feel like this, the circumstances of our life feel like this. And this psalm is fascinating because that's not where it goes with it. It doesn't really want to talk about the circumstances. At the end of the psalm, we find out, yes, there are evil people after him. Yes, there is something going on that David needs God's help with, but the circumstances he does not recognize as the main event in this psalm. The circumstances which we're so likely to focus on they're kind of an end note. They're kind of an afterthought. And, oh yeah, by the way, these things are also going on, and I need your help with those. But the desolation of his setting, whether it's interior or exterior or both, is the focus here. And this psalm makes a really just important claim for us when we find ourselves in those situations, that the circumstances are not the focus. God is. And there was a really interesting, of the stuff I was reading this week, one of the authors just looked at this psalm. It's a very action-based psalm. It's got verbs all over the place. And he noticed that there's these kind of clusters that this psalm is talking about and how we are relating to God. And so I just thought it was very interesting looking at these. And he made the comment that he says, look, our ongoing pattern of life with God is going to involve kind of these three different clusters of verbs. So let me read those. He says, our ongoing pattern of life with God is going to involve some seeking and some searching, maybe questing and thirsting and fainting and being forced to bring to mind and muttering and clawing and holding on to. There's an effort there that it's not just easy and effortless when related to God. He says, but you know what? There's also the flip side of that in which we will be seeing God and being filled by God, in which we're being supported by God, in which we're being delivered by God. Those seem just as intertwined as places where we are thirsting and seeking and needing things from God as well. And both of those things together, not just one or the other, when we're receiving, but also when we're seeking, intertwined with all those verbs are ones like glorifying, worshiping, lifting up our hands, resounding and praising and rejoicing and exulting. And so you see in this psalm kind of a memory of, so I looked up at you in the sanctuary, beholding, there's that beholding, right? Your glory and your power. And so I think when we find ourselves in these difficult circumstances, we can sometimes just want to go back, right? We want to say, let's get back to that place when everything felt all right, when God's presence was obvious, when things felt like they made sense. When we're in exile, we just want to go back home. Or maybe we recognize there is no going home. We cannot go back to those places. And so we're always kind of looking for the next thing. But I think what this psalm is trying to argue, and that I think we so often miss, is as we are looking for that sense of peace, as we are looking for that sense of fulfillment, as we are thirsty and hungry for something, which we and our culture are constantly looking for, this psalm reminds us right from the get-go, God, you're our God, and earnestly we seek you. We think maybe we're seeking safety. We think maybe we're seeking a sense of home. We think maybe we're seeking water when we're thirsty. But our soul is thirsting for you, and our flesh is fainting for you, even when we're in a dry and weary land when there is no water. And I think that this kind of insight that not to focus on the circumstances, not to focus on the things that are right in front of us, and to recognize this sense of lack, this sense of frustration, this sense that things are not right, that we're always hungering for, that we're always looking for. This ultimately is our hearts looking for and longing for God, as Augustine put it, like we will not find rest anywhere until we learn to rest in God. And so we are going to have lives that are often defined by places of wilderness, again, whether that's an external circumstance, whether it's other people are putting this on us, whether it's something within that desperately needs God's doing and God's help. And the invitation from this psalm is to recognize, even if the circumstances change, it won't be long before we find ourselves having to seek and having to rely on God to feel fulfilled, which hopefully will lead to praise, right? And so the circumstances of our lives are important. It's not like we just ignore those and pretend like they don't exist. The footnote, does talk about how difficult the circumstances are. But I think this psalm is an invitation to look at and recognize what is ultimately wrong with all of us. We are seeking things out. We want something. We feel unsettled because ultimately we are looking for God's presence. He's going to be the only one that ultimately is going to fulfill us. And so this psalm, like many psalms, they are both meant to be an expression of the things that are on our heart, because there are seasons when we recognize this, like, God, I'm thirsty for you. I'm hungry. Things are off. They don't feel right. Again, this is the wilderness. But it can also be a psalm that's kind of a teacher, right? We say these words long before they express what we're actually feeling. We recognize, unsettledness. We recognize anger and frustration and so much that is going on in the world. And then we can use these words to say, you know what? God, you're my God, even though I'm not feeling it right now. And I earnestly seek you. I'm trying to seek you. My soul is thirsty. I think it's for you. My flesh is fainting within. I think it's for you. There have been times when I've experienced you. I've been in the sanctuary. I know those things. I'm not there right now. Let Psalms like this be an invitation to come back to rejoicing to God, to finding kind of that place of wholeness that we're seeking, but we're not going to find anywhere else but in God's presence. So no matter what the circumstances of your life are, I hope that this is an invitation, one which your heart can express. Say, you know what? I'm rejoicing because I'm seeing God, I'm experiencing God, I'm feeling this fullness. And yet, there's going to be so many times when that is not our experience. And in those times and places, you know what we do? We let this psalm speak for us anyway. We let this psalm invite us into what we can be and what God is saying. I'm thirsty for you. I need you. You have been there in the past. Please be here with me now.